Look around you. The language you are speaking right now shares a significant portion of its vocabulary directly with Latin. The contract you signed to rent an apartment relies on legal codes written thousands of years ago. Even the government buildings in your city, with those towering marble columns out front, pull their designs straight from antiquity. Mosquito-infested settlement of farmers living in mud huts along the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy. A muddy village on the Italian peninsula is a vulnerable target, not an obvious global superpower. For a settlement this small, even a minor drought or a single raiding party could have destroyed their nascent state. They didn't scale up through sheer luck. Instead, every time the Romans faced a systemic existential crisis, they completely restructured their political and military operating system to survive it. The early Romans did have one geographic advantage, sitting on a navigable river near a major crossing point. But their real advantage was psychological. Their founding myth, the story of twin brothers Romulus and Remus, abandoned and nursed by a wolf, embedded a deep cultural belief that they were forged by survival and struggle. That survival instinct was tested early. For its first few centuries, Rome was a kingdom. By 509 BC, the seventh king, Tarquin the Proud, was violently abusing his authority, creating an internal crisis of tyranny that threatened to tear the city apart. Rather than simply assassinating Tarquin and installing a kinder king, the Romans evaluated this system itself. They concluded that vesting absolute power in a single individual was the fatal flaw. So they permanently exiled the monarchy and engineered a completely new method of governance, the republic. This new system intentionally fractured power. Executive authority was split between two consuls, checked by a senate of patricians, and assemblies where common plebeians could veto legislation. This domestic stability provided the manpower needed to expand, eventually absorbing the entire Italian peninsula. Establishing this framework of distributed power and institutional checks was their first major system upgrade. It allowed Rome to expand its population and territory without immediately collapsing into civil war under the weight of an unchecked dictator. Controlling Italy brought Rome into direct contact with Carthage, a dominant North African maritime power. Carthage possessed the naval strength to control the Mediterranean, and Rome hit a hard commercial wall. Rome barely had a navy. When a Carthaginian warship washed ashore, Roman engineers reverse-engineered the vessel. They used it as a blueprint to mass-produce their own fleet from scratch, effectively bootstrapping a navy into existence to win the First Punic War. The conflict escalated severely during the Second Punic War. General Hannibal Barca bypassed the sea entirely, marching an army, complete with war elephants, over the frozen Alps to invade the Italian mainland directly. This tactical map of the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC shows how Hannibal dismantled the Roman military. He lured a numerically superior Roman force into a trap, executing a perfect double encirclement. Rome lost tens of thousands of soldiers in a single afternoon. Almost any other ancient state would have sued for peace immediately. Rome refused. They lowered the recruitment age, freed enslaved people willing to fight, and raised massive fresh armies. They would not negotiate. Decades of relentless attrition followed. A Roman general named Scipio finally bypassed Hannibal in Italy, launching a direct invasion of Carthage's home territory in North Africa. Rome won the war, and in a later conflict, besieged the city of Carthage itself, burning it to the ground. Rome proved that early tactical brilliance is vulnerable to a long enough timeline. Their true competitive advantage was a capacity to absorb catastrophic losses, adapt their military technology, and simply refuse to quit. By eliminating their only rival, Rome secured total Mediterranean dominance. This success introduced a fatal bug. As Rome conquered new lands, it didn't just bring back gold, it brought back hundreds of thousands of enslaved people. The wealthy elite used this cheap labor to build industrial-scale estates, producing grain at prices that small, independent Roman farmers couldn't match. These former farmers went bankrupt, lost their family land, and flooded into the capital city, angry, unemployed, and entirely desperate. Julius Caesar identified and exploited this structural flaw perfectly. By leading a decade-long conquest of Gaul, he secured a vast personal fortune and extreme loyalty from both his battle-hardened soldiers and the common citizens back in Rome. When the terrified Senate ordered him to surrender his command, Caesar defied them. He marched his private army across the Rubicon River, sparking a civil war he ultimately won. A desperate faction of senators assassinated him in 44 BC, hoping to salvage the old system. The assassination failed to restore the Republic, plunging Rome into more civil wars. Caesar's adopted heir, Augustus, emerged victorious and applied the ultimate system patch. He concentrated absolute military and political power in his own hands, establishing an autocracy. Crucially, he maintained the Senate and the old titles, keeping the comforting illusion of the Republic intact. Consolidating control ended the internal violence, creating a 200-year period of stability called the Pax Romana. This top-down authority directed colossal infrastructure projects, including monumental stone aqueducts to supply growing cities, and a 250,000-mile highway network that connected global trade routes from Britain to the Silk Road. It was during this era of concentrated wealth that emperors engineered their most famous architectural marvels, like the Colosseum, designing grand arenas to provide the public spectacles required to keep the urban population entertained and compliant. To manage a territory stretching across 3 continents, the Romans traded away 5 centuries of complex political freedom in exchange for the stability of a single ruler. Over time, the sheer scale of this success generated a crisis that no internal patch could solve. The borders stretched too far for any single administration to defend or fund. By the 3rd century AD, crippling inflation, plague, and constant military overthrows brought the empire to its breaking point. In response, Emperor Diocletian executed an administrative split, dividing the empire into distinct western and eastern halves to make governance manageable. Shortly after, Emperor Constantine officially legalized Christianity, adopting a rapidly growing faith to create a new ideological unifier for the fracturing population. For the western half, these adaptations arrived too late. Decimated by economic strain and continuous incursions from Germanic tribes, central authority dissolved. In 476 AD, a Germanic leader deposed the final Western emperor, a teenager ironically named Romulus, leaving the great city to fracture and decay. Yet the structural split actually worked for the East. Operating from their capital in Constantinople, the eastern half, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, maintained Roman law, administration, and identity, thriving for nearly 1,000 more years. From a cluster of mud huts on a riverbank, to a republic defined by legal limits, to a vast autocratic superpower, the history of Rome is a detailed case study in exactly how human societies build power, adapt to survive their own flaws, and eventually collapse under their own weight. If you want to see how other ancient civilizations solve these problems, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive.